He stood in the center of the barn, boots planted in the dirt, voice low enough to keep from caring but sharp enough to cut. "I'm not asking again," he said. "Before the sun goes down." She faced him with her hands folded at her waist, the left one trembling despite how still she kept the rest of her. "You're not giving me much choice." "You had a choice," he said. "You've had weeks. This is me being patient." Her eyes slid toward the open barn door, where two hired hands lingered, pretending to be oil harnesses. "This isn't patience. This is cornering. Call it what you want. You'll say yes now, or you'll regret it." The air between them was thick with dust and the smell of hay. A horse shifted in its stall, hooves clattering against the planks. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "Yes." The word landed heavy, not triumphant. He gave a single nod, as though that closed the matter. The taller of the two men outside muttered something under his breath. The other shushed him, eyes fixed on the ground. He stepped closer to her, lowering his voice even more. "Tonight, no preacher, no crowd, just a paper signed at the courthouse. Understand?" She didn't answer. "Do you understand?" "I said yes," she repeated. He looked at her long enough for it to become uncomfortable, then turned on his heel and walked toward the light spilling through the doorway. "Be ready." When he was gone, she exhaled slowly, pressing her palm against her thigh to still the shaking. The hands moved in, pretending to adjust tack on a saddle that didn't need adjusting. One of them asked quietly, "You all right?" She met his eyes for half a second. "Go back to work." By late afternoon, the barn was empty, except for her. She sat on a bale, elbows on her knees, staring at the dust motes turning in the sunbeams. Every creak of the rafters felt like the barn leaning in to listen. The sound of boots returned. He came in carrying his coat over one arm. "We're going now," he said. She stood. "I need to change." "You look fine." "I'm not walking into the courthouse in this." "You'll wear what you've got. No one cares." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Outside, his truck was already running. She climbed in, the seat creaking under her. He drove without speaking, one hand on the wheel, the other drumming on his knee. Halfway to town, she said, "You're not going to ask me why I said yes." "I don't need to," he said. "You think you know." "I do know." "And if you're wrong?" "I'm not." She turned to look out of the window, watching the fields blur past, the fences running straight into the horizon. When they reached the courthouse, the late sun had dipped low enough to throw long shadows across the steps. The clerk looked up from his desk as they entered. His eyes flicked to the man's badge, mostly hidden in his coat pocket, and then to her mud-streaked hem. "This is fast," the clerk said. "Write it up." The man replied. The clerk shuffled papers, his pen scratching quick. She stood in silence, feeling the weight of the room pressing in. "You sure about this, miss?" the clerk asked without looking up. "She's sure," the man said. She spoke before she could stop herself. "I'm sure." The pen stopped. The paper slid forward. He signed first, his name bold and deliberate. He passed the pen to her. She signed with smaller letters, the ink catching where her hand shook. The clerk took the paper, stamped it, and slid it into a folder. That's that. They stepped outside into the orange wash of the evening. Across the street, a group of men stood on the boardwalk outside the feed store watching. A woman leaned against a post, arms crossed, eyes narrowing as they passed. In the truck, he started the engine but didn't move. "You're mine now," he said. "I was never yours." He glanced at her, a thin smile pulling at one side of his mouth. "We'll see." She looked straight ahead, refusing to give him the satisfaction of meeting his eyes. The truck rolled forward, tires crunching over the gravel. The courthouse receded in the rear view, the shadows swallowing it as the sun dropped lower. At the edge of town, they passed the same hands from the barn, now walking along the road. One tipped his hat to her. She didn't return it. By the time they turned onto the long drive leading back to the ranch, the last light was fading. Neither had spoken for miles. The barn loomed ahead, dark against the sky, its doors still open from that morning. He parked by the house, shutting off the engine. "Inside," he said. She stepped out, feeling the ground cold under her boots now. As she walked past him, she caught the faintest trace of satisfaction in his expression. The door shut behind them with a sound that seemed to echo longer than it should have. They stepped out onto the courthouse steps, the late light slanting hard across the square. A small crowd had gathered, some leaning on the rail, others standing with their hands in their pockets. The murmur died when they appeared. The clerk stood just inside the door, the paperwork clutched in his hand. His eyes drifted to the badge half hidden in the groom's coat pocket, then back to the bride's face. He noticed the mud at the bottom of her dress and the faint bruise just above her collarbone. He swallowed once, looking like a man who wanted to say something but wouldn't. A farmhand near the rail nudged the deputy beside him. "You sure you want to be part of this?" The deputy didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the groom. The groom stepped forward, voice even. "Let's get this done." The clerk hesitated. "This is quick, even for write it up," the groom said. The bride stayed still, her hands folded loosely in front of her. The crowd shifted, boots scraping on the wooden boards. Someone coughed. Inside, the clerk moved to the desk, setting the paper flat. "Names," he said. The groom gave it to him without pause. The bride spoke hers quietly, almost under her breath. The pen was placed before him first. He signed with a firm hand, the ink heavy on the page. He slid it to her. She took the pen, held it a second too long, then scrawled her name. The farmhand outside leaned toward the deputy again. "She doesn't look happy." "Keep your voice down," the deputy muttered. The clerk took the paper back, his thumb pressing into the fresh ink as if making sure it was real. "There," he said, not looking up. "It's done." The groom turned toward the door, hand brushing the small of her back, guiding her forward. She didn't resist, but didn't move faster either. Outside, the crowd straightened. A woman in a faded blue dress crossed her arms, eyes narrowing on the bruise at the bride's collarbone. A man spat into the dirt. "Evening," the groom said to no one in particular. The bride kept her eyes on the ground. As they reached the bottom of the steps, the farmhand spoke low but sharp. "She's not smiling." "She's married," the deputy said. "That's all that matters now." The groom's head turned slightly at the words, but he kept walking. The truck was parked a few feet away. He opened the door for her, waiting until she climbed in before circling to the driver's side. The engine turned over, rumbling loud enough to fill the pause between them. "You didn't say much," he said as they pulled away. "You didn't leave space for me to." He gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "You'll learn." The square faded behind them, the crowd breaking apart slowly, as though none of them wanted to be the first to turn away. The clerk stood in the doorway until the truck was gone, then shut it with a sound that echoed off the brick walls. On the road out of town, she looked straight ahead, her hands clasped tight in her lap. "They all saw," she said quietly. "They'll forget." "You think so?" "They will." The truck hit a rut, jolting them both. He kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift. "You don't care what they think," she said. "They don't matter." She almost smiled, but stopped herself. "They matter to me." He glanced at her, a shadow of annoyance crossing his face. "Not anymore." The miles stretched between the town and the ranch. The sun dipped lower, painting the fields in fading gold. She watched the horizon as if expecting it to give her an answer. When they turned down the long drive, the barn came into view again, dark against the last light. She thought of the men who'd been standing outside it earlier, of their sidelong glances. The truck slowed to a stop in front of the house. He cut the engine. "You'll stay inside." "Tonight," he said. "I didn't say I was leaving." "Good." He stepped out, waiting for her to follow. She lingered a moment before opening the door, feeling the air cool against her skin. The porch boards creaked under their weight as they crossed. He opened the door and let her in first. The inside smelled faintly of wood smoke and something older she couldn't place. Behind them, the gravel in the drive shifted, a sound that might have been the wind or footsteps. He shut the door without looking back. The truck rolled up the long drive as the last of the sun dropped behind the ridge. The house stood against the amber light, 2 stories of weathered wood, its windows glinting like they were watching her arrive. He parked close to the porch, killed the engine, and stepped out without a word. She followed, her boots sinking slightly into the packed dirt. He unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The smell of polished wood and faint smoke drifted out. "Main room's here," he said, stepping aside for her to enter. She crossed the threshold. The room stretched wide, with a stone fireplace that looked as though it had never gone cold. 2 armchairs sat angled toward it, a low table between them holding a glass ashtray with 1 stubbed cigar. The walls were lined with shelves, some holding books, others framed photographs she didn't stop to study. "Kitchen's through there," he said, gesturing past the dining table. "Upstairs are bedrooms. Mine's at the end." Her eyes moved to the staircase, then to the hall, running behind it. A single door sat at the far end, darker than the rest. He followed her glance. "That one stays locked." She didn't ask why. He led her upstairs first, pointing out the bathroom, the guest room, and the narrow storage closet. They passed his bedroom with the door half open, the bed made sharp and neat. Back downstairs, she found the dining table already set. 2 plates, silverware lined straight, glasses already filled with water. He frowned at it. "Didn't tell her to do that." "Your cook?" she asked. "Yeah, must have guessed." "She guesses a lot." He didn't answer. The silence between them stretched. She stood at the edge of the table, fingers brushing the back of one chair. "Hungry?" he asked. "No." He sat anyway, pulling a chair out for her. She didn't move toward it. Her eyes drifted to the mantel above the fireplace. A single framed portrait hung there. A woman in a dark dress, her hair pinned tight, gaze steady and cold. "Your mother?" "Yeah." "She looks like she knew what she wanted." "She did." "Did you?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Still do." She turned back to the portrait. "She doesn't smile." "Never saw the point in it." The water in her glass caught the light as she turned it slowly between her fingers. "Was she the one who taught you how to corner people?" His jaw shifted, but he didn't speak. A sound from the back of the house broke the stillness. A door shutting softly, footsteps fading. She glanced toward the hall. "Your cook is leaving. She's not here today," he said. "Then who is that?" He stood, walked to the kitchen doorway, and looked in. "Nobody," he said. She stayed where she was, watching him return. "You keep a lot of locked doors," she said. "Some things stay shut for a reason." Her gaze flicked to the hall again, to the door at the end. "And if the reason changes?" "It won't." The light in the room had turned deeper, shadows stretching from the corners. He moved toward the table again. "Sit," he said. She didn't. "You think this house belongs to you?" "It does." "Not in the way you think." His hand rested flat on the back of the chair he'd pulled out for her. "Sit," he said again, softer this time. She stepped forward slowly, stopping just short of the table. Her eyes moved once more to his mother's portrait. "She'd be proud of you." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe she'd think you were a coward." The room felt smaller with the words hanging there. His eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed level. "Eat something. Long day tomorrow." She didn't move until he sat, breaking a piece of bread and setting it on her plate. The sound of the clock on the mantel marked each second. Outside, the light was almost gone. The dark came fast out here. She sat finally, the chair legs scraping against the wood floor. He poured her more water without asking. She took a sip, her eyes fixed on the portrait above the fireplace. Neither spoke again until the plates were empty. The market was already loud when she stepped onto the boardwalk, but the voices dipped as soon as they saw her. She kept her chin level, her steps slow, like she didn't notice. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery, the butcher's block thudded in the corner stall, and someone was calling out the price of peaches. She stopped at the produce table, brushing dirt from a basket of potatoes. A shadow leaned in beside her. "You married him quickly," the woman murmured, voice low but sharp. "Quick for someone carrying the sheriff's blood." The words landed cold. Her hand froze midair. She forced her mouth into something close to a smile. "Don't know what you mean." The woman's eyes flicked to her midsection, then back to her face. "Sure you don't." She set the potatoes down, the wood creaking under the weight. "Have a good day," she said, walking away before the woman could answer. The murmur behind her rose again, small pockets of words she couldn't make out. A man at the next stall tipped his hat without looking her in the eye. She bought what she needed, bread, coffee, flour, without lingering, each exchange brief and tight. When she passed the saloon, 2 men stepped aside, watching her without speaking. Back at the ranch, she carried the sacks into the kitchen. The cook was already there, sleeves rolled, hands deep in a bowl of dough. "You're back early," the cook said. "Didn't feel like staying in town." The cook dusted her hands, glanced at the sacks. "What happened?" "Nothing." The cook raised an eyebrow. She set the bread down on the counter. "What's been said about me?" The cook didn't answer right away, just kept kneading. "I'm asking," she pressed. "Are you sure you want it?" the cook said finally. "Yes." The cook sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "They say you came with baggage, that you were already tied to someone before him." She didn't blink. "Tied how?" "You know how." She leaned against the counter. "And they think it's the sheriff?" They don't think. They're certain. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the counter. Why? The cook's eyes dropped to the dough. Because folks remember things. Who you were seen with, when you disappeared for a while, when you come back looking different. That was before I came here. Doesn't matter. People carry stories longer than they carry debts. She looked toward the back door. They'll keep talking. They will. She straightened. And what if I say it's not true? The cook met her eyes now. Then you're calling the sheriff a liar. That won't end well for you. Silence filled the space between them, broken only by the sound of the dough hitting the board. Who else has been talking? She asked. The cook shook her head. Doesn't matter. You start naming names, you'll start fights you can't finish. I can finish them. Not in this house, the cook said, voice firm. Not under this roof. Her mouth tightened. Whose roof is it? The cook's hands paused. You already know the answer. They stared at each other a beat too long before the cook went back to the dough. She gathered her sacks and moved them to the pantry, each step measured. The pantry was cool, smelling of coffee and dried herbs. She set the flour on the shelf, her mind still turning over the woman's words at the market. When she came back into the kitchen, the cook was humming low, her back to the door. You should stay out of town for a while, the cook said, without looking at her. Why? Let things cool. Let people talk themselves out. They won't, she said. No, the cook admitted, but you'll be less of a target if you're not standing in front of them. She pulled out a chair at the table, sat, and watched the cook work. What happens if I don't stay out of town? The cook glanced at her over her shoulder. Then you'll find out exactly how much weight that badge in his coat still carries, and not in your favor. The afternoon. Light shifted through the window, striping the table. She traced a line in the dust with her finger. The cook spoke again, quieter now. Don't say the sheriff's name in this house. Not to him, not to me. She didn't answer. Promise me, the cook said. She kept her eyes on the table. I'll think about it. That's not enough. It's what I've got, she said, standing. The cook's voice followed her as she stepped into the hall. Some names stick to you no matter how many times you wash. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, listening to the faint sound of the dough being worked again. Then she went up without another word. The sound of boots on the porch came first, slow, heavy, each step deliberate. She was in the front room, folding a towel, when the door swung open without a knock. The sheriff filled the doorway, his hat low over his brow. His eyes went to her face, then down to her midsection, lingering just long enough to make the air feel colder. Morning, he said. She set the towel on the chair. You don't knock. Not when I know who's inside. He stepped in, shutting the door behind him. Her gaze stayed steady. Are you here for him? I'm here for whoever answers. The boards above creaked. Her husband's steps slow on the stairs. He appeared in the doorway to the hall, expression unreadable. Sheriff? Thought I'd stop by, the sheriff said, not looking at him yet. His eyes stayed on her a moment longer before shifting. Heard you got yourself hitched. That's right. Quick! Her husband's jaw tightened. Are you keeping a calendar for me now? The sheriff let the words hang, his thumb hooking into his belt. It just seems worth noting. Folks in town are talking. Folks in town have always talked, her husband said. The sheriff's gaze flicked back to her. Some talk carries more weight than others. She didn't flinch. And what weight would that be? That depends on who's holding it, he said. Her husband stepped forward. You've said what you came to say. Not quite, the sheriff replied. I'd like a word with her. That's not happening. Won't take but a minute. She's not answering your questions. The sheriff smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. You think you can decide that for her? Her husband's shoulders squared. In this house, yes. The silence stretched, only the clock ticking on the mantel. Finally, the sheriff tipped his hat to her. You know where to find me. I do, she said. He moved toward the door, pausing as he reached for the handle. Best be careful who you stand next to in town. People notice. They remember. I'm sure they do. Her husband's voice came sharp. She won't be in town without me. The sheriff glanced back. That's one way to keep her safe. The door shut with a heavy thud. She turned toward her husband. You don't tell me where I can go. I just did. You think keeping me here changes anything? It keeps their eyes off you. They're already on me." He crossed the room, close enough for her to see the small twitch in his jaw. "You think I don't hear what's being said? You think I don't know what he's getting at?" "I think you're afraid of it being true," she said quietly. His mouth tightened. "You don't get to talk to me that way." "I just did." They stared at each other, neither moving. He stepped back finally, running a hand down his face. "Stay out of town unless I'm with you." "You want me under your thumb." "I want you alive," he snapped. Her voice softened, though the edge stayed. "And what would happen to me if I wasn't?" His eyes narrowed, but he didn't answer. She turned away, picking up the towel again. "The sheriff didn't come here for a friendly visit. He came to see if I'd look away first." "You didn't," he said. "No," she agreed. "But you did." That landed harder than she expected. He stood there, hands at his sides, as if deciding whether to push back or let it pass. Outside, a horse's hooves clattered against the packed dirt, fading toward the road. The sheriff's visit had left a weight in the room that even the fire in the hearth couldn't push out. He moved to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to watch the road. If he comes back, he will. You don't answer the door. And if you're not here, then you wait. She folded the towel neatly, set it on the chair, and walked past him toward the stairs. You can't keep the whole world out, no matter how many locks you use. His voice followed her up. I can try. At the top of the stairs, she paused, hand on the railing. Try all you want. It won't change who I've already spoken to. Down below, he stayed by the window, watching long after the road had gone empty. They walked past the last fence post, the grass taller here, uncut and moving in slow waves with the wind. The air felt different at the edge of the property, quieter, heavier. The old stone well sat in the dip of the ground, its rim chipped and leaning in places, the boards over its mouth gray with age. Rusted nails pinned them tight. He stopped a few feet short, hands in his pockets. Hasn't held water in years. She stepped closer, studying the cover. I heard it last night. He frowned. Heard what? Water, moving. It's dry. I'm telling you what I heard. He shook his head. Probably whined in the boards. That doesn't sound like water. His tone hardened. It's been dry for years. Let it be. She crouched, touching the edge of the wood. The nails were old, but they'd been driven in. Deep. Why bother nailing it shut if it's dry? Safety. For who? He didn't answer, just looked past her at the tree line. She stood again, brushing dirt from her hands. You keep a lot of things closed around here. Some things don't need opening. She met his eyes. And what happens if they open on their own? They won't. The wind shifted, bringing the smell of damp earth, faint but real. She glanced down at the boards again. It's not dry. His voice dropped. You don't know what you're talking about. She stepped back from the well. Maybe I don't. Maybe I will. They walked back in silence, the grass brushing against their legs. When they reached the fence, he latched it behind them with more force than needed. Inside the house, she lingered near the back window, looking out toward the edge of the land. The well sat just far enough that she could barely make out its shape. He busied himself at the table, sorting through papers that didn't need sorting. You thinking about going back there? He asked without looking up. I'm thinking about why you're so quick to tell me not to. His jaw moved once, but no words came. That night, the wind picked up. The shutters rattled softly, and the sound of the boards on the well echoed faint in the dark. She lay awake, listening. When sleep came, it was thin and uneasy. She dreamed she was standing at the well again, only this time the nails were gone and the boards loose. She knelt, lifting one just enough to peer inside. The dark was so deep it felt solid. A voice rose from below, small and clear. Help me! She tried to speak, but her throat locked. The voice came again, closer now. I'm here. Her fingers gripped the wood, splinters digging into her skin. She leaned closer, but the dark seemed to pull her in. Don't leave me. The voice whispered. She woke with a start, the sound still ringing in her ears. The room was dark, the only light a thin strip from the hallway. Beside her, he slept without stirring. She lay back down, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere beyond the walls, the wind shifted again, carrying with it the faintest sound. Not quite the wind, not quite water, but something in between. He was at the table when she came in, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. The morning light barely reached the corners of the kitchen, catching on the rim of the cup. She didn't sit. "I'm pregnant," she said. He didn't look surprised. "Whose?" "You know." "I want to hear it." She held his gaze. "Not yours." He leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking under him. "Say it." "The sheriff's." A slow breath left him, not relief, not anger, something heavier. "You think I didn't already know." "I think you wanted me to lie. I wanted you to be smart." She took a step closer to the table. "Smart would have never married you." His jaw tightened. "Smart would be keeping your mouth shut." "You asked. I answered. You could have stayed quiet." "You wouldn't have." He picked up the cup, took a sip, set it back down. "You're not leaving." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't keep me here." "I can, and I will." "You think you can chain me to this house?" "I don't need chains. You've got nowhere to go." "There's always somewhere." "Not for you. Not now." Her hand rested on the back of the chair across from him. "You're afraid." "Of what?" "That people will know." "They already know," he said. "Then why keep me?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Because I decide who leaves and who stays. And you," he pointed toward her stomach, "stay." She didn't flinch. "That's not your decision." "It is now." The space between them felt thin, the kind of thin that could snap or burn with one wrong move. She shifted her weight slightly, her eyes flicking to the door. "What if I walk out?" "I'd follow." "And if I ran?" "I'd catch you." They stared at each other, neither blinking. "You can't watch me every second," she said. "Try me." The clock on the wall ticked loud in the quiet. Her fingers drummed once against the wood of the chair. "You think this is about control. It is. It's not. It's about fear." His eyes narrowed. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." "You've got a sharp tongue for someone who just handed me her weakest point." "I didn't hand you anything." "You already had it." He pushed back from the table, the legs scraping hard against the floor. "You're not stepping foot off this property unless I'm with you. And if you try, I'll make sure you regret it." Her chin lifted slightly. "Threats don't work on me." "They will." She let the words sit, heavy between them. "You'll never own me." "I don't have to. I just have to keep you here." Her gaze swept the kitchen, measuring the doorway, the distance to the back door, the window above the sink. He watched her eyes move. "Don't," he said. She met his gaze again. "I haven't decided yet." "You won't get far." "You sound sure." "I am." The coffee had gone cold, but neither reached for it. She stepped back, giving herself more room. "I'll decide what happens to me." "You already did when you said yes." Her mouth twisted into something between a smile and a warning. "Then maybe I'll decide again." He stood fully now, the chair left at an angle behind him. "You think you're quick enough?" "I know I am." The seconds dragged on. Finally, he moved past her toward the hallway, his shoulder brushing hers just enough to feel deliberate. "Don't test me." She turned, watching him go. "I already am." His footsteps faded toward the front of the house. She stayed where she was, her hand still on the chair, eyes on the door, the space between them replaying in her mind, every inch of it measured. She shut the bedroom door behind her and crossed to the trunk at the foot of the bed. The lock clicked open with the soft resistance of something rarely used. She pushed back the folded clothes, reaching for the quilt lining at the bottom. Her fingers found the seam where the stitching was uneven. She tugged, and the edge of an envelope slid free. The paper was worn at the corners, the ink faded just enough to prove time had passed since it was last touched. Her name was not on the outside, only the return address in her own handwriting. She sat on the bed, turning it over once before breaking the seal. Inside, one folded sheet. The handwriting was hers, but the lines stopped halfway down the page, cut off mid-sentence. The letter was addressed to her sister, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years, not since the day they walked opposite directions out of their father's house. Her eyes moved to the next line, the name she'd sworn not to write, written in her careful, slanted script. Seeing it now made her chest tighten. She didn't remember putting the letter here, didn't remember starting it. She read the first lines again. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was a warning. She'd written about someone watching her, someone she couldn't shake. The sentences trailed into the half-finished line. She stared at it, trying to remember why she'd stopped. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled her back. Slow, deliberate. She slid the letter back into the envelope and tucked it into her skirt pocket, folding the fabric over it. A knock at the door. "Are you all right in there?" His voice carried no warmth. "I'm fine." "You've been quiet." "Nothing to say." The knob turned slightly before stopping. "Come down when you're ready. Supper's getting cold." His steps receded, each one measured. She stayed seated, listening until the sound faded completely. Her hand rested on her pocket. The paper felt heavier than it should. She thought about the last time she'd seen her sister, standing on the porch, one suitcase between them, both too proud to speak first. She looked back at the trunk, wondering if there was more hidden beneath the lining. She knelt, pulling the rest of the quilt away, running her fingers along the wood. Nothing else. The letter was the only thing. She stood and crossed to the window. The yard stretched dark under the fading sky. Somewhere near the barn, a shadow moved, too quick to be him, too solid to be the wind. She slipped the envelope deeper into her pocket, pressing it flat. The name inside pulled at her, heavy with meaning she wasn't ready to face. At the top of the stairs she paused, listening again. The house was quiet, only the faint clink of cutlery from the kitchen. She walked down slowly, her fingers brushing the wall as if to steady herself. He looked up when she entered the dining room. "Took you long enough." "I was putting things away." His eyes narrowed slightly. "In the trunk?" She kept her face still. "In the room." He didn't push, but his gaze lingered longer than it needed to. She sat opposite him. The meal was already on the table, steam curling up from the plates. He passed her the bread without speaking. "Did you eat much today?" he asked. "Enough." He nodded once but kept watching her. She kept her eyes on the food, forcing herself to eat. The envelope pressed against her thigh, a reminder with every movement. When the plates were cleared, he leaned back in his chair. "Tomorrow you stay here. I've got business in town." "Alone?" "Yes." She didn't respond. His gaze sharpened. "Is that a problem?" "No." He stood, the chair scraping against the floor. "Good." She stayed seated as he left the room, listening for his steps on the stairs. When the door to his study shut, she rose quietly, moving back toward the kitchen. She filled a cup with water, but her mind was on the envelope. Back upstairs, she took it from her pocket and hid it under the mattress, folding the edge of the sheet over the spot. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the place where it lay. The name inside still burned in her mind. She smelled the smoke before she saw it. By the time she reached the main street, the air was thick with it, curling up into a sky gone gray. The blacksmith shop was already swallowed in flame, the roof sagging, sparks leaping into the wind. People crowded the boardwalk, shouting, passing buckets in a frantic chain. The heat hit her face as she moved closer. The sheriff stood near the front, coat thrown back, barking orders at anyone who would listen. His voice cut through the chaos, sharp, commanding. Men ran toward the fire with water, stumbling through the thick haze. Women clutched children to their skirts, pulling them back from the edge. She stepped into the crowd, letting it swallow her. The fire snapped and roared, drowning out smaller sounds. Everyone's eyes were on the flames. It was the perfect moment to move. She eased away from the bucket line, slipping between two wagons parked crooked on the street. In the shadow of the milliner's shop, a figure waited, a woman in a dark shawl, her face mostly hidden. "You came," the woman said without looking up. "I didn't have much choice," she replied. The woman's hand emerged from the folds of the shawl, holding something small and brass. "You'll know what it's for when you see it." The key was cold when it touched her palm. She closed her fingers around it. "Where?" "You'll find it. Just don't let him see." The sound of a shout closer to the flames made them both glance toward the fire. When she looked back, the woman was already stepping away, melting into the moving crowd. She slipped the key into her skirt pocket, pressing her hand over it. Across the street, movement caught her eye. He was standing on the boardwalk outside the general store, his gaze fixed on her. Even with the smoke drifting between them, she knew he'd seen the exchange. His expression was unreadable. Not anger, not surprise, just a stillness that made her stomach tighten. She turned, letting the crowd close in around her. Someone jostled her shoulder, another shoved past with a bucket. The noise rose as part of the roof gave way, sparks showering down onto the street. The sheriff moved fast, pulling men back before the wall collapsed. She kept her head down, weaving through the press of bodies until she was clear of the worst of it. The smoke thinned as she stepped into the alley behind the bakery. She leaned against the wall, catching her breath, fingers curling around the key again. From here, the fire sounded farther away, just the muffled roar and the occasional crack of breaking timber. She stayed until the shouting dimmed, then circled back toward the street. By the time she emerged, the flames were lower, though the building was gone. The sheriff was talking to a group of men pointing toward the smoldering remains. People stood in clusters, voices low, eyes darting. She felt his presence before she saw him. Turning, she found him only a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets, studying her. "Where'd you go?" he asked. "Needed air." "Plenty of it here," he said, glancing at the smoke curling past. "Not the kind I wanted." His gaze held hers for a long moment. "You spoke to someone." She didn't answer. His mouth curved slightly. Not a smile. Not quite. "You think I didn't see?" "I think you see more than you should." "Maybe." The sheriff called something from across the street, breaking the moment. He glanced toward him, then back at her. "We're going home." She nodded once. "Fine." They walked toward the wagon, the noise of the crowd falling behind them. As they climbed in, she felt the weight of the key against her leg. She kept her hand in her pocket the whole way back. The ride was silent. He didn't ask again, and she didn't offer anything. When the house came into view, the sky above it was dark now, the last of the day's light gone. He pulled the wagon up close to the porch and climbed down. She followed, the key still warm from her hand. Inside, he shut the door and leaned against it. "If you've got something to say it now." She set her basket on the table. "I've got nothing." He watched her for a beat longer, then moved past her into the main room. She stayed in the kitchen, listening to his steps fade upstairs. When she was sure he was gone, she drew the key from her pocket and set it on the table in front of her. Small, brass, heavy for its size. She turned it once between her fingers, then hid it in the lining of her apron. The house was quiet when she stepped inside. His coat was gone from its hook, boots missing from their place by the door. She waited a beat longer, listening for the sound of movement upstairs. Nothing. The key in her apron felt heavier than it had all night. She slipped it out, closing her fingers around it as she crossed the main room. The hallway stretched ahead, dim even in daylight, the door at the end darker than the rest. Her steps were slow, measured. The floor under her creaked in protest, but no other sound came. She reached the door and fit the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. The air inside was colder. Dust hung in the stillness, the smell of wood and something faintly metallic rising as she stepped in. Crates were stacked along the far wall, lids nailed shut. A single table sat in the center of the room, 3 thick ledgers spread across it. She closed the door behind her, turning the key again before pocketing it. Her eyes moved to the far corner where a cradle stood, draped in a cloth, yellowed with age. She crossed to the table first, pulling one of the ledgers closer. The pages were neat, the handwriting tight and deliberate. Names, dates, columns of symbols she didn't recognize. Each line was precise, no space wasted. She flipped to another page. More names, more dates, more symbols. Her own name stopped her cold. Beside it, one of the unfamiliar symbols, darker than the rest, as if written twice. Her fingers traced it before she realized she was doing it. The ink was smooth, newer than the other entries. She turned a few more pages, looking for patterns. Some names had the same symbol as hers. Others were marked differently, some crossed out entirely. The columns told a story she couldn't read, but she felt its weight all the same. She closed that ledger and opened the next. The handwriting was the same, but the dates went back further. Years she hadn't even been alive. Entire families listed, some with the same mark beside every name, others ending abruptly, blank spaces left where more entries might have been. Her gaze drifted to the cradle. The cloth covering it sagged low, its edges brushing the floor. She reached out, lifting one corner. Inside, the wood was worn smooth, the mattress thin and brittle. No blankets. No toys, just the faint outline where a small body might have lain. She let the cloth fall back, the fabric puffing dust into the air. Returning to the table, she pulled the last ledger closer. The paper here was crisp, newer, only a few pages filled, the most recent dated weeks ago. Her name appeared again, this time alone on the page, the same symbol marked beside it. A floorboard creaked. She froze, eyes lifting to the door. The sound had come from just outside in the hall. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She closed the ledger quickly, sliding it back into place with the others. Her hand went to the key in her pocket. Another creak, closer this time. She stepped to the door, turning the key in the lock just as the shadow under the frame shifted. Are you there?" His voice was low too. She kept her tone steady. "Looking for linens." "That's not the linen closet." Could have sworn it was. A pause, long enough for her to picture him standing there with his hand on the knob. "Open it." She hesitated just long enough to count 2 breaths, then turned the lock. The door swung open and he filled the frame, eyes moving past her into the room. "What were you doing?" "I told you, looking for something." His gaze landed on the cradle, lingered a moment, then shifted to the ledgers. "Find it?" "No." He stepped inside, his presence closing the space between them. "You're not supposed to be in here." "I didn't see a sign." His eyes met hers. "Don't come back." She slipped past him into the hall, the key burning in her pocket. Behind her, the door shut with a heavy thud, the lock sliding home again. He stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, the light from the setting sun cutting between them. The glow bled into the hallway, catching the dust in the air and turning it to gold. His face was shadowed, but his voice carried no softness. "You were in that room again." She didn't deny it. "I was." "I told you not to." "You tell me a lot of things." His jaw tightened, the corner of his mouth pulling taut. "Are you looking for trouble?" "I already found it the day I said yes." They faced each other, still as the light stretched long over the floorboards. The sun dipped lower, pressing the shadows deeper. "You think you can just walk away," he said. "I can." "You won't get far." "I don't need far," she said. "I just need to go." He stepped into the hall, closing the space between them until she could smell the faint trace of tobacco on his shirt. "You've got nothing. No money. No friends left who'd risk crossing me." "I've got what matters." His eyes flicked to her skirt pocket. "That letter." "That's right." "You think a piece of paper will save you?" "It's not for saving me," she said. "It's for ending you." He studied her, eyes searching for a crack. "You've carried it this whole time." "Every step." "What's in it?" "The truth." He laughed once without humor. "Truth doesn't matter here." "It will when it's in the right hands." His hand twitched, and for a second she thought he'd reach for her, but he stopped short. "You're not as clever as you think. And you're not as untouchable as you pretend." The silence between them went taut. Somewhere outside, a horse whinnied, the sound drifting in through the open door. Finally, he stepped back, leaning against the frame, blocking half the light. "The door's open if you're so sure." She moved toward it, her steps slow but steady. As she passed, his eyes followed her like a weight across her shoulders. "Don't come back," he said. "I won't." The air outside was cooler, the kind that comes right before night swallows the land. She walked across the yard, boots sinking into the dirt. The sun slid closer to the ridge, painting the barn in a dying red. At the edge of the drive, she looked up. The sheriff sat on horseback at the ridge line, a dark silhouette against the bright edge of sky. He didn't move, didn't call out, just watched. She stopped for a moment, hand brushing the letter in her pocket. The paper was warm now from the heat of her skin. He hadn't followed her out yet. The sheriff's horse shifted, stamping once, the sound carrying down the slope. She could feel his eyes measuring her just as sharply as her husband's had in the hallway. She kept walking. The road stretched ahead, dry and uneven, lined with scrub. Her boots crunched over the gravel, the sound louder than it should have been. Behind her, the porch boards groaned. She didn't turn, but she knew he was there, leaning against the post, arms crossed, watching her go. "You walk out now," he called, voice flat. "You don't get to choose what happens next." She stopped, half turning just enough to see him. "I'm choosing right now." His mouth pressed into a thin line. "Last chance." "This was over the moment you nailed that well shut." A flicker crossed his face. Quick, but real. "You don't know what's down there." "I know enough." They stared at each other, the space between them heavy with all the things they hadn't said. Then she turned fully, walking away without another word. At the ridge, the sheriff was still there. As she came closer, his eyes flicked from her to the house behind. "You done?" he asked. "Yes." "Do you have anything to bring with you?" She shook her head. "Just this." Her hand brushed the letter again. He nodded once. "Then let's go." They didn't look back as they started down the slope. The sound of boots on dirt mixed with the steady creak of saddle leather. The air smelled of dust and cooling earth, the sun burning its last light into the horizon. Halfway down, she glanced over her shoulder. The ranch stood small now, the windows catching the last of the glow. He was still on the porch, nothing in his stance giving him away. When the sun finally slipped behind the ridge, the house disappeared into shadow. She turned back to the road ahead. Whatever came next, she wasn't stepping back onto that porch again, and she knew, by the weight of the letter in her pocket, by the way the sheriff's gaze stayed forward, that the shadow over that house would only get darker. They rode in silence for the first mile, the sheriff's horse keeping a steady, unhurried pace along the narrow dirt road. The light faded fast out here. 1 minute amber, the next bruised purple. She kept her eyes forward, the letter in her pocket feeling heavier with each step away from the ranch. "Are you carrying trouble with you?" he asked finally. "Always." He didn't glance over. "How bad?" "Bad enough you came to the house twice." His jaw shifted. "I didn't come for him." "Then who?" "You." She almost laughed, but it came out flat. "You're late." The road dipped, bringing them closer to the low creek that cut the valley in two. The water was little more than a dark ribbon now, moving slow under the moonlight. The sheriff reined in just enough for the horse to step down carefully into the shallows. "You know he's not letting this end," he said. "I know. He'll come after you." She looked at the pale ripples around the horse's legs. "That's why I'm not going to make it easy." On the other side of the creek, the road turned narrower, lined with trees close enough to block most of the fading light. The sheriff's eyes kept scanning the shadows. "Are you holding something worth his time?" he asked. "Yes." "You going to tell me what it is?" "No." They rode another stretch without speaking. A coyote called somewhere far off. When they reached a break in the trees, the sheriff slowed. "I can take you to the station," he said. "Get you on a train before he figures which way you went." "That's not where I'm going." "Then where?" She shook her head. "I'll know when I get there." He gave her a long look, then turned the horse toward a side path she hadn't noticed. "Shorter way," he said. They passed an old windmill, leaning into the weeds, its blades creaking. Beyond it, a small cabin stood back from the road, the windows boarded over. She didn't ask about it, but her eyes lingered. "Empty?" she asked, finally. "For years," he said. They kept moving until the trees thinned and the road widened again. The first lantern light of town flickered ahead. "Are you sure you're ready to walk in there with me?" she asked. "I'm the sheriff, he said. "That's not an answer." He didn't respond. As they reached the edge of town, the sounds of the saloon drifted through the night. Laughter, a piano struggling against the noise. She stayed close to him, eyes scanning the boardwalks for anyone watching too closely. They stopped in front of a livery stable. The sheriff dismounted and tied the reins. She stayed where she was until he reached up a hand. "You coming down?" "I'm thinking." "You don't have much time for it." She slid down, her boots hitting the packed dirt. "Where now?" He nodded toward the far end of the street. "Safe room under the jail. You can stay there tonight." "I'm not staying in a cell." "It's not a cell. It's a lock and a key, isn't it?" "Yes," he said. "Then it's a cell." His eyes stayed on hers. "It's safer than the street. I've had enough of locked doors." A voice called from across the street. Two men leaned on the railing outside the saloon, their eyes fixed on her. One of them smiled slowly like he knew something. The sheriff's hand went to the grip of his revolver. "Inside," he said. She followed him into the shadow of the stable. The smell of hay and horses filled the space. "You trust me?" he asked. "Not yet." "Then why follow me?" She reached into her pocket, pulling out the letter. The paper looked smaller under the lantern light. "Because of this." He didn't take it. "What's in it?" "The only thing that can end him." The sheriff studied her face. "Are you ready for that kind of fight?" She folded the letter back into her pocket. "I've been in it for years." A sound outside. Footsteps too slow to be casual. The sheriff moved toward the door, peering out. His hand twitched toward his gun again. "He's here," she said. "No," the sheriff replied, "but someone he sent is." The air between them felt tight. "You leave now," he said. "You've got a chance to make the train." "And if I stay?" "Then we settle it tonight." She thought about the ranch, the locked room, the cradle under the cloth. She thought about the well and the voice she'd heard in the dark. Her jaw set. "We finished it." The sheriff nodded once, as if he'd been expecting that answer. "Then stay close." They stepped back out into the night, the lanterns swinging in the doorway, casting their shadows long across the dirt. Somewhere behind them, the piano in the saloon stumbled to a stop.